Thanks for listening to Fluff and Crunch, where we talk about system, setting, and story in tabletop RPGs and share our experience to hopefully help you have your best game. How are you, James?
I am doing well. How are you, Jeremy?
I too am doing well. I've had a good, busy, productive day where I had to deal with just one stupid headache that I would file under the heading of "Your crisis is not my problem," just because you created a crisis for yourself. But I handled it, so all is well.
I also had one of those situations today, and we'll leave it at that.
All right. I'll leave mine at that too. Actually, though, you know what? I'm happy to say that mine was not related to anyone with whom I work.
Oh, that's good.
Nothing like that. It was like third and fourth party sorts of things. I'll tell you offline. That's just a little.
All right. That sounds,
So,
I want to hear about that. So,
okay. Well, you'll hear about that. So how's your week been? Have you done any gaming?
we are continuing with my solo D&D campaign, which is going really well. My character is currently leading the defense of a siege. So that's very interesting.
You're leading the defense against said siege.
Correct.
That sounds kind of cool.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I would be happy to, at some point, talk a little bit more about the story of this campaign and how it's come to be at some point. But we're kind of like 1/3 of the way through one of the segments, and it would be cool because then that would be the third arc that we've completed.
Okay.
So if I finish that, to talk about the 3 arcs we've gone through, but that's not what we're talking about today. Have you done any gaming before we get into our topic?
We had another session of the Pathfinder Eberron Iron Fang invasion, blah 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 blah. We had another session of that, and that is moving along. It's one of those things that, if you're going to run a campaign that is going to take the characters up to like level 9 or 10 in a level-based game, you can have some excitement early on, but really when it comes to the real payoff stuff, the real money stuff, great character development, really interesting plot development, and things like that, and players challenging you by coming up with stuff that you didn't anticipate, that takes a while. And we're just getting toward that now, which has been good.
Yeah, in my experience, for a good long campaign, it takes between 5 and 10 sessions for you to really break that ice of, we understand the characters, we understand the story. Now we can start doing really interesting things.
Yeah, we're actually we're putting our thumbprints on it and building it. So yeah, that was mine. But
good.
But we're to talk today about something that you've had literally lying around the house for some time, and it was something that, I don't know if it definitely wasn't a big thing, but it was like a blip of a thing, a while back when it was up for Kickstarter, and I thought that it would be interesting. I'm interested for a couple of different reasons, but I thought it would be interesting for our listeners to get some clue about this game that is out there that is, I'd say, unique. So I'm going to quiz you all about Cohors Cthulhu.
Yes.
When was this Kickstarter anyway?
Okay, so it kickstarted like 4 years ago, I want to say, was when I was graduating from college that they released.
Still? Oh my goodness.
Oh yes, it was within like the first year of me graduating college. So it was like between 4 and 5 years ago that they announced it and started accepting pledges for Cohors, which I was one of the first 200 people to kickstart.
Did you get anything cool for that?
So you didn't get anything for being early. It was all based on the levels that you kickstarted, which I did not choose to support at the highest level. It was just too out of my price range at the time. But I did support it the second from the highest level. So I did get some I got all of the really important things, and I got those really important things in PDF to go with that. So
Oh, good.
that was kind
Okay.
of the main thing for what I did. So, but it was Kickstarter then, and then it took between 2 and 3 years for it to actually be fully fulfilled because of a lot of the shipping and fulfillment difficulties that Modiphius was having at the time, which I think was not just for Cohors. It
Yeah.
was also difficult to get other properties that they had because of shipping
Yeah.
delays.
Yeah, they ended
But
up about a year, maybe 2 years ago. I think it was about 2 years ago. They opened a warehouse in the United States. So instead of only shipping things from the UK, they started. I mean, I guess they bring stuff over in large containers, and then they handle fulfillment directly to U.S. customers from that warehouse. But so you have the you have a selection of books, and you have the PDFs for them and whatnot. Before delving into what's in the books and all that stuff, really quickly, Cohors Cthulhu, give me the elevator pitch.
yeah,
What is it?
so of course. So I will start this for all of the people that do know Octoon Cthulhu. You will be very familiar with Cohors Cthulhu as I get into this. But for people who have no idea what any of this is, Modiphius has done a really good job of coming up with RPGs that have a mythos background. And when I'm talking about a mythos background, I'm talking mainly about what you would hear of like Cthulhu and that type of mythos. There are other
Like
ones with
Lovecraftian stuff.
Lovecraftian. Yeah, that's the
Okay.
one that most people think of, but that is the general rule. But Modiphius has done a really good job of coming up with different time periods in which the mythos is involved. So Octoon Cthulhu is based around World War II. Cohors Cthulhu is based around ancient Rome, which is amazing, especially for me. I studied ancient history and political thought. Rome was my specialty. So this was like right up my alley. When you had introduced me to 2D20 and Modiphius, I was like, this is perfect. I'm going to kickstart this game. I love it. But that is really the pitch is you are in ancient Rome and you're fighting both the enemies of Rome or Rome itself and the mythos if you choose. So there are all these different things that you can do with that because it's ancient. There's a lot less structure to
Right.
requirements of government and things like that. So it's a very interesting idea.
Is it explicitly set in the same universe, the same Earth as Octoon Cthulhu, or is maybe that just kind of like left to the GM to determine?
So it like Octoon Cthulhu is mentioned multiple times throughout the books.
Oh,
Like
okay.
if you know Octoon Cthulhu, you will understand this. So, but they don't explicitly say like this is the 200 AD of the same world as Octoon Cthulhu.
Okay.
So I'm hesitant to say this is like a prequel to Octoon Cthulhu because there's a lot of very interesting individual things about this, but at the same time, there are a lot of references to it. So I think they've designed the game to be like, if you want to somehow mold this into Cohorts and Octoon Cthulhu being the same world for your group, that's fine. But also, if you want to act like the other game doesn't exist, that's fine too.
Okay. All right. So you have, before we go into an overview of what's in the books, what are the physical materials that you received?
Yeah, so I received a lot of very great things when I went through this. And I think it's really important to note that there were a lot of very extra things that you could get to go with this. So when I go through the physical materials, I selected the things that I thought were just the bare minimum to like play the game.
Right.
And then there were others. So for me, I received the three, what I would well, the two core books of any game. So you have the Game Master's Guide and the Player's Guide. If you play Dungeons and Dragons, you would notice the
Sure.
DMG and the Player's Handbook. It's the same thing for this. They're the same books. They're really well made. They're really nice. So I received those two. And then I received a third book called Germania, which is just an adventures book. It is all different adventures that you can run in the German provinces or in Germania, which is one of the regions that Rome bordered. And it is not the only region that they talk about in the Game Master's Guide, but it is the one where they're like, here are a bunch of different adventures you can run. I also received a book called Legends of Lorium, which is a bunch of short stories. It's about 190 pages long, to just help GMs and or players understand the world. So I received that. I received 2 sets of dice. I received a booklet of character sheets, and I received a GM screen. And then the one thing that I didn't receive physical, but I did get digital included with all of the digital versions of what I just mentioned, was I received STL files for miniatures if I wanted to
Okay,
3D
that's
print
cool.
them.
Now, are all the books hardbacks?
So the 3 main books are hardback. Legends of Lorium is paperback. It's a,
Okay.
well, I'll show you kind of. So
So
for all
Legends of
of
Lords
you heard,
is a perfect bound. How long are each of the hardbacks? Like how
so
many
I'll hold.
pages?
Yeah, so it depends on the book. Each of them is a little bit different. The Game Master's Guide is the longest. Unsurprisingly, it's about 265 pages of actual content. The Player's Guide is 218 pages of
Oh,
content. And then the Germania, which I just keep calling Germania Adventures because it's full of adventures, is about 185 pages of content.
oh wow. So
Yeah.
you've got like 600 over 600 pages between those three hardbacks.
Yes. And then when you add in Lorium, Legends of Lorium, which just to give you an idea, the size difference between the
Oh, okay.
books, yeah. But Legends of Lorium's also 190 pages of short
Wow. Okay.
stories.
So you
So
have a
even
lot
though
of
it's about
content.
half the size, it's still, yeah, a lot of content.
Okay. All right. So what about the setting? Before we dig into things about rules or whatever like that, what is, I mean, so it's you said second century,
Yes, it is
but sec
specifically set according to the books in the reign of Marcus Aurelius, for any of you
okay.
that know your Roman history.
Okay. I don't know what it is with your generation and Roman history. I don't know where, well, I don't, it was funny. I was thinking about this earlier today and I was like, I don't get it. It's not that I denigrate it or look, I just like, I don't get it. You know, as you people, I mean, you really like this stuff, and that's cool. That's great. Okay, so Marcus Aurelius, second century, with Mythos.
Correct.
Beyond that, what? Give us some more depth as to the setting and what makes it sound interesting. What makes it sound cool to game in?
This is where I'm going to just kind of tell what's there because personally, it just being set in second century Rome is more than enough for me to be interested in playing this. But for
Right.
other people, to give you background on kind of how the mythos becomes involved in this story, it they do give in the Game Master's Guide a very good amount of background information on how the mythos is involved in Earth, where all of this came from. And it starts with this idea of the War of the Ancients, which is this war between the Elder Gods and then the Outer Gods, which the Outer Gods are what we think of as the mythos. And
Okay.
then the Elder Gods are basically their enemies. Saying that it's good versus evil is kind of hard to say because the Elder Gods really don't care about anything any more than the Outer Gods do. It's just they want to beat the Outer Gods. So there's kind of this war between them. But the difference is the Outer Gods tend to be a little bit more hands-on than the Elder Gods. The Elder Gods tend to be a little more separated and work through groups of people. So how this happened is in the ancient war, there was a bunch of different civilizations that were fighting on both sides. And I'm talking like spacefaring civilizations,
Okay.
according to this book. But one of the empires, the Hyperborean Empire, are the ones that fight with the Elder Gods and become the greatest enemies of the Outer Gods of the mythos. So they fight, but it ends up becoming a losing battle. The Hyperboreans and the Elder Gods are pushed back, and they are forced to take refuge on basically sanctuary worlds that are hidden or so underdeveloped that the Outer Gods just aren't really interested in them.
Okay.
And one of those worlds is Earth. So, and what happens are a few of those Hyperboreans end up coming to Earth. They have advanced technology, so they're able to alter themselves physically in order to interact with the humans and kind of hide themselves. And this is where we move into kind of the second phase of the backstory. There's not a lot of information on the War of the Ancients, there's just kind of a little bit to give you info. Then we get
Like
into
how did these creatures end up on Earth? Okay, because
exactly
it's
and
not
kind of
really.
explaining.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and like one of the main stories about this is like it's called the Rending of Sarthosis. So one of the mythos god or one of the mythos creatures gods things, he gets like blown up by the Hyperboreans into a bunch of these little fragments that go all across the galaxy. So that becomes a important like story element and thing later in the story. But when the Hyperboreans land, they actually kind of do the same thing that the Outer Gods did with them and pick a civilization that they're going to raise up to help them fight and repair and basically rebuild their civilization.
When did these aliens show up on Earth?
So it doesn't give you like a specific date. It just says they've been here a really long
Okay.
time. But the time in which they start really doing things and they build the strongest empire of old is they're the ones that create Atlantis. And by that I mean like they find Atlantis and then help build it into this great civilization of ancient knowledge. So they build up Atlantis and then basically the story is they find these stones that they can use as magical conduits to create weapons and armor and technology. And they use them to power all of this stuff. And it makes Atlantis into this great, powerful empire. What they don't recognize, at least the Atlanteans don't recognize, is that those shards are shards of Sarthothus, this mythos being. So this Hyperborean, who has been helping them kind of grow and become this empire, has been cleaning these shards so that they're useful and not dangerous to people. But in order to stay alive, she has to go into this hibernation chamber and disappears for great lengths of time. And so the Atlanteans get into a bit of a power struggle because being around these shards corrupts you because of the outer gods and their influence. And so some of the Atlanteans become corrupted and some of them don't. And then there's a civil war while Mayron, the one who's missing, is gone, and the civilization basically collapses. But because of all of this futuristic technology, some of the Atlanteans managed to extend their lifespans the same way that the Hyperboreans do. So when you get to the actual story of Cohors Cthulhu in around 200 AD, you have at least two Hyperboreans still running around on Earth that are mentioned, at least between 6 and 8 known Atlanteans still running around doing things, and then all of the stuff going on with Rome and the people around it. So that's kind of the story you're dropped into is
Okay.
there are these other groups that are vying for things, but then you also have the Romans, but also the German tribes and the Celtic tribes and all of these other peoples that are involved on the periphery that may or may not be involved with these ancient powers or may just be human beings doing things that human beings do.
So you've got they establish multiple groups, multiple factions, multiple movements, and multiple sources of stories and pressure. Some of them mundane, and some of them supernatural. Okay.
Correct.
Okay. Um, how much of actual Roman history and actual European history is wrapped into it, or is it just like they use it for fictional purposes?
So the backdrop is very they attempt to seem very historical with it. So I would call it a very good build of historical fiction that there's enough of the history to make it believable. Modiphius also at the very beginning of the GM's guide has a like disclaimer section about you really shouldn't bring this thing up or that thing up or touch on this thing. So I put in like there are some notes on like, hey, you should maybe give people a content warning if you're planning on including slavery, or you probably really shouldn't touch Christianity or Judaism because talking about current religions in a fiction story can be dangerous.
So what they're saying is like use the broadish brushstrokes of like the cosplay version of Rome, but
Correct.
ignore any of the Roman history that you could actually wrap into a story that would make it more rich.
Right. So I wouldn't say that they say not to, but they do the very like, hey, if you're going to, you should really make sure everyone's okay with it before you do that as a GM, which is fine. Like if you're the type of person that doesn't want to do that, fine. If your party doesn't
Yeah.
care, like whatever. But it does, as you read through the story, they try to state that, hey, this is historical. These types of things are happening in the world. You're at these kind of locations. But that's the one thing they don't talk a whole lot about the Roman Empire as a whole. They focus very much on it's almost like civilizational statements, not like regional or time period statements of like the Romans think like this. And it's like, well, the Romans thought changed from when they were founded to when the Western Empire fell.
Gotcha.
So at which point are we talking about? And then they're very specifically talking about the civilization around Lorium, which is their starter town.
Okay.
And they focus really heavily into that, but there's not a lot of any information on like, well, what's going on in Greater Germania or in Gaul or in Egyptus or in any of these other locations. So it does very much seem like there was a focus on here are the broad strokes of what it would mean to be generally around the Roman Empire, and then here is this very specific location we created for you to start your campaigns in, but we're not going to talk a lot about anything else.
And you know, I mean, it's a game.
Right.
It is a fictional property. There are plenty of historical war games that you can learn some actual history from. Uh,
Correct.
you shouldn't be looking to a role playing game to,
Well, and not
or a
only
video
that,
game or anything like that to
yeah.
supposedly learn. So okay, that makes sense. Like
Well, and this is a
they
game
give you the
about the
look.
mythos. Like
Yeah,
we're talking about Cthulhu literally being
sure.
a being in this world. So if you're going for historical accuracy, that's
You're
probably
barking up
not
the
going to
wrong
be
tree.
exactly.
So okay, now if you, dear listener, are not familiar with the 2D20 system, what you should do is go back to the earliest episodes of this podcast from like several years ago. Um, Chris, my original host, he and I hit 2D20, the system, and the original games that came out under it from like every angle possible. So if you're interested in what 2D20 is and how it works and why we think it's cool and so on and so forth, go back and do that. We're not going to do that here. Suffice it to say, I think that it's probably easy to like. I don't know. I've described 2D20 as being a high action, um, high player agency because of the meta currencies system that a lot of people I've met, when they look at it from the outside, it seems complicated, but once you demonstrate it to them for like 5 minutes, the fundamentals are there. The system is coherent, it makes sense, and it flows really well and quickly at the table. People are able to pick up the basics of it pretty quickly. What of the system, though, is tweaked or is unique to Cohors? I assume there is magic of some sort. How is that? How's that kind of stuff handled in this game?
So it's really funny because Cohors is basically Octoon Cthulhu reskinned.
Oh,
There is very little difference other than I think it does have a more fleshed out magic system because they expect you to be using magic more. But there are a lot of different paths to magic in Cohors Cthulhu. So there are actually three different backgrounds and then like a ritual casting style.
okay,
So you have different options on how it works, but they really act like spells act as skill checks,
okay,
essentially. So you're given a skill that you're using, and then of course you also use one of your attributes, but it's a little bit more lenient on the attribute. Each individual spell actually has a skill attached to it. So you don't pick that, it just tells you. Um, it gives you the difficulty ratings as a GM, so you don't really even need to come up with that yourself
okay,
unless there's something you want to affect it. But it is the same as any other task that you're completing. One of the things I do like, they did change a little bit, that there are flawed versions of casting spells,
Hmm.
which is very cool. So I didn't really see in the rules how to play that. I think they leave that up to you a little bit more as a GM, whether a player can choose to cast a spell as flawed or if it's like a complication that can happen depending on how. But to give an example, there's a healing spell that's the base. I joke it's the cure wounds of Cohors, but it allows you to heal up to your skill level in your casting all of your allies within close range. The flawed version of that spell will heal any creature in close
Ah,
range. So that's where I'm like, I kind of like it as an option. Like a player could choose to cast it flawed and make it
yeah.
easier, or as a downside of, hey, I try to cast this and I fail. Okay, well, you don't fail that badly. It still goes off, but oops, you just healed all the bad guys around you too.
So,
And
so in a
then,
nutshell,
yeah,
just for those listening, the magic system in Octung has you roll to cast. So you roll against a variable difficulty level, which or rating, which is based on the spell, and so you aren't guaranteed to cast a spell. It's a skill, and those are for like your what I call like fire and forget kinds of spells. Whereas there are other spells that are ritually cast that take longer, and there is an extended task mechanic in 2D20. It's explained in Octung. It's in the other games, and so that's just applied to casting a ritual spell. Is there a cost to the spells? In other words, so is there like a personal toll? Or do you take some kind of quote unquote damage or lose a personal resource in casting?
yes, you have to spend so much drain on this. So you are
Okay.
drained as a character when that happens. And then you also can use momentum to change spells as well, which is very nice. So, an example, that healing spell, you can use momentum to increase the range, or you can, so instead of it being close range, you can do it up to medium, at any allies in medium range if you
Okay.
spend momentum on it. So there are costs attached to it, but it's basically what you're dealing with Octune. It's just they've done it a little bit more like focus on, hey, this is available. It's kind of expected that player
Okay.
characters use this, that kind of
Okay.
stuff.
Is there is there a decent variety of spells in the books for characters, either PCs or NPCs?
Yes. So there are, like I said, there are three different spellcasting traditions.
Yeah.
So they have German in these books, they have a Germanic tradition, they have a Celtic tradition, they have like these different options. But each one, what they've done is they've made like, hey, here are the Celtic spells, but there aren't really any overlaps in the German spells. So what you can do is you can reskin some of the
Yeah.
Celtic spells into a German type name and make it a German spell for that. So they've done a good job of giving you a variety without much overlap that you can then just reskin as a player or a GM so that it covers all of the different options. But they don't really, from what I remember, have a like specific guide on building spells,
Okay.
but they give you so many examples that if you wanted to do something, you could probably do it pretty easily, or rule on the fly, like you spend more momentum to do different things. Like there are tons of things that you can do once you understand how the spellcasting works.
Have you compared these spells to those in Octung?
I have not like sat down side by side with the books, but I know from when we played Octung, some of the things that I remember seeing from that. It does seem like they're pretty, like they're not exactly the same, but they have similar-ish effects.
Yeah, I'd be curious to compare between those from a mechanical standpoint. Like, how much does this cost? How difficult is this to cast? And then also in effects, like what do the spells actually do? Because if they're pretty close, you could tweak, and then you end up expanding your amount of spells. Are there any other, whether or not it's tied to Octung or whatever, are there any other interesting or standoutish mechanical dimensions to the game that just stand out to you?
Yeah, that's what, from what I'm remembering, that was really the main difference when I looked through. A lot of this seemed pretty much the same. You're still using truths the same way that you would in most of the other games. Um, There are some interesting like background things. So like they have lineages in this. So like you can make yourself descended from Atlantis and like all of that kind of stuff. But also there are other like, hey, because of that and the way that they built it, I would make it like, hey, there's also these really cool things that if you descend from like Rome or from the Scythians or from like all these other groups that you could build, like you're a Germanic person, so they have different things. But you could increase upon that because there are like you have Atlantean, which they call the Void Forged and all this other stuff. So they do, but it's very subject specific that without like reading the game master's guide and the player's guide for this game, just talking about it is going to not make a whole lot of sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, but
So
yeah,
once
so
once you read them,
mechanically,
you're like, oh, that fits very flavorfully and makes sense and gives you a lot of benefits. But
okay.
it also, in a weird way, is kind of like Conan, where it's like, hey, in order to do that kind of stuff, you need like, I need to be this good at something for that to work. Or, you know, how kind of like there's a social aspect in Conan. There's kind of like that, like, hey, you're choosing to be an Atlantean. That's going to have repercussions
Right.
for you at times. So there are some very interesting things in that.
Do you feel like the way the mechanics have been tweaked for this, do you feel like they fit the property and the established goal? Like when you're reading and you kind of get a sense of like what kinds of adventure and what kind of story vibe and tone is this game purporting to be able to support? Do you think the mechanics would point in that direction?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
that's what I actually think in a weird way this was easier for me to wrap my head around than Octoon Cthulhu was because it
Well, of
is
course, because you're a Rome nerd.
well, no, hey, I love World War II too, so don't even
I just
start
love it
there, but
more.
that's true. But I think I think anything with rolling D20s and D6s just for me feels better when I'm using swords and bows and that kind of
Maybe
stuff.
so, yeah.
Yeah, it just feels more correct, and that
Right.
might just be my D&D like coming through with that.
Whereas
But
Traveler, just like completely going to just D6s, feels proper because its science fiction is a total departure from the other gaming that you've done.
exactly.
That
So
makes
with
sense.
this, where it's kind of like you're rolling a d20 to do something, and then you're essentially rolling damage dice, whatever the
Yeah.
type of die. In this, it's d6, but whatever it is, that just feels correct when I'm wielding a sword or a spear or something like that. It just feels more correct. So I think for me, it was easier reading this to be like, oh, that amount of damage makes sense for that kind of weapon and that kind of stuff. So it was a little bit easier for me to understand there. It's also fun because the weapons and armor also for anyone who's played D&D, when you get like magical weapons and stuff like that, the artifacts they have in here, it feels like that but more specific because they're like named weapons and armor that you're getting from such and such person. So it really does feel more like that oomph behind it than just that's a +2 sword.
Right.
You can upgrade your swords and essentially make a +2 sword, but when you find a named weapon,
That's
that's a
cool.
big deal. Yeah.
Yeah. So, talking about, you talk about the idea of, tying the mechanics to the supposed promised or ideal story conditions. What about adventures? What about adventure material? What is there in, I would assume, the GM's guide and the Germania book? What is there to help a GM and players get going? Is there a default? You said there's a default location. Is there a default, like, is there a default story tied to that location? What's in these books that would help someone who's like, hey, this sounds kind of cool, and where do I start other than Gaul or
Right.
wherever?
Yeah, so the default location is Lorium, which is this Roman settlement right on the edge of what we would know as the German territory. So, like between France and Germany. And it really is great because it's a blending of like three different cultures. Because you have the Romans that are there, you have the Germans that are there, and then you have the Gaulish or the what would be the French like territory. Those people are all blended together there, so it does feel like a frontier town. The nice thing is all of the adventurers that are in or the adventures that are in the book are expected to be around Lorium, but you could completely change them as long as it's somewhere on the border with Germania. it all makes sense. They do a really good job of introducing a big bad. His name is Hergen. He is one of the surviving Atlanteans who's trying to conquer all of Germania and the surrounding territories and destroy Rome. So, the perfect intro to a big bad for a party. But they do give you some flexibility. They do a decent job of also introducing some other big bads in other areas that you could choose to use if you want to. So like there's another Atlantean that's in Egypt, and and one of the Hyperboreans is in Rome. So like they do have these introductions of here are these different people that you could make bad guys, you could make allies, but they spread them out a lot so you can kind of separate your campaigns from one another or force people to travel between locations. The one downside is there's very little information or adventure direction for anywhere else. So it's like, hey, this is set in Germania. I can try to reskin it to Egypt, but it doesn't really fit the like culture and civilization that you would find there. So the property seems to be very focused on that location
Okay.
because that's where they chose to turn all of their attention that interested, I'm guessing, the writers the most. But I think the property is very open to being used anywhere that you want to. There are 8 adventures in the Germania book,
Oh, wow.
and they
Okay.
are like full adventures, so makes it really easy for you to go through and kind of pick spot to spot. They actually have a map that all of the locations that are on there fit into. So if you choose to start from the starter town and follow those adventures, they'll get you, like I said, about 8 adventures. If you do arcs in a campaign or 8 individual adventures, you can do it that way. But that's really the focus, or just on those.
So you potentially, if you were to jump in and go through all the adventure material they've provided you, you've probably got a couple of months. If you were to play weekly, you've got a
Yeah,
couple of months of gaming that's just there for you.
based on my experience with Modiphius and 2D20, I would say you probably have for weekly, I would guess you'd have between like 3 and 6 months
Okay.
of consistent gameplay with this. Of course, depending on your party, like if they're the type
Sure.
of people that don't get sidetracked at all and they really focus, it might be shorter. But if you also have the people that are easily distracted and will go all over the place, it could take a lot longer.
Right.
So it is a lot of very good info. And like I said, the Germania book, it's 185 pages of content.
That's a lot.
So yeah, it's a
I mean, for
lot
just
for
and that's
adventures.
that's the I'm asking, is that's the location and its adventures.
So that is, it gives you, so it's not the location. All of
Okay.
Lorium is actually in the Game Master's Guide. So
Oh,
this is
okay.
just like a tiny little bit of background information on Germania as a place. And by that, I mean like 5 pages max
Oh,
of that.
okay.
Then adventures. And then at the end, they have a bestiary for that area. So you have
Okay.
all of the enemy, like specifically tailored enemies for that area. So you have some examples for that are, because the Game Master's Guide goes more into like, it has some of those, but it's also a lot of mythos specific creatures. So they kind of balance that of like, here are the things that you would see in Germania specifically versus here are a lot of mythos based enemies that you can
So
use.
like Octon Cthulhu, your rogues gallery of creatures and enemies and stuff's in the GM's guide. Okay.
Correct.
Like for the
Yes.
game at large. Okay. And then you
Correct.
have some additional that are specific to Germania. Okay. How about so we've sketched out the contents of the possibilities with what do you think of the overall quality, um, physical quality, art, organization, writing? What do you think of those things?
I think it's pretty good. One of the things that I've run into with the more recent Modiphius books, I feel like there are some things that they like go really in depth into explaining, and there are a few things that they don't explain as much. So I think that that happens again, like with the magic system. When you read the book and you read through that system, you're like, oh, so I'm just treating this exactly the same as I would any other skill test. And that might have been their point. It might not have been, but that's what comes off to me when you read it. So there are things like that where it's like, if you say, but they don't just say,
Okay.
hey, this is how you use spells. They just say, well, here's all the stuff. And when you read that, hey, that looks like a skill test. However, the physical quality of the books are amazing. The hardback books are great. They feel great. The art is really good. They kind of alternate between a like digital drawing art style, and it almost looks like a claymation art style for certain things,
Okay.
which is
Huh.
cool. So it just which I don't know if that's just they use that and it looks like it, but it's actually digital. But it is a kind of cool art style. They focus a lot on characters more than locations. So this is a very heavy, like they give you a lot of NPC descriptions and a lot
Okay.
of optional player characters. Like if you just want to, here are your like basic characters that you want to play as a GM with new players. Here's a bunch of them that you can use. So they do a really good job of getting into that. The location, I feel like they expect you to kind of understand a little bit more than maybe in other games, but I guess maybe I'm so used to Conan where it's like a lot of very action location based art. Here it's very character driven art, which is fine.
Okay.
Um, but it's very high quality for everything I've used. All of the books are high quality. The game master's screen is high quality. I would say it's basically on par with my traveler screen that I have, which I would say Mongoose traveler screen is one of the
It's a
best
really
I've ever
good screen.
seen.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they're like back to back. They look pretty similar. They have useful information. The dice that I got with it, because Modiphius, when you kickstart something, almost always sends dice. They seem to be pretty high quality. They made them two different colors, so it's really easy if like one is the player's dice and one is the GM's dice. You can keep them separate that way. They gave 5 different types of character sheets, so you have lots of options on how to do that, which
Wow.
is cool. And they all have different art. Like if you're from Egypt, your character sheet looks different than if you're from Rome, which is different from if you're from Germany. So you have all of these different things. So I think the quality of the physical materials, of the writing, of all that, it's what I would expect from Modiphius.
Good. Okay. Yeah, it sounds interesting. I would definitely like, if I were in town at some point and you were running it, I would definitely give it a whirl. I mean, I think 2D20 is a great system. I mean, it works in a variety of settings. And yeah, I would definitely play it. Do you have any parting thoughts or parting shots or anything like that about the game? Um, have you been able to get anyone to play it?
Not yet. I'm going to. I think now that I've done all of the prep for this podcast episode, I understand it well enough that I can run it now. Like I took the time to
Gotcha.
sit down and read through everything and kind of understand how it all works. I think now I could sit down and actually run a game and run basically just through the Germania book, which is
Yeah,
awesome. I don't really have any parting shots at it. I'm going to say I'm going to
that's
probably
good.
change some stuff personally just because I'm probably going to make it slightly more historical in some ways. Um, they they spend a decent amount of time talking about the pantheons of the era, just so you like the Roman gods and the Greek
Yeah,
gods and
yeah.
all of that kind of stuff. But they really don't talk about anything special other than, well, you have the outer gods and you have the elder gods, and that's really, and sometimes they co-opt things, but they really don't get into anything with humans themselves or with the gods that humans come up with. And I think I'm going to do some personal tweaking there. I kind of like the idea that the reason that Earth was a interesting place for these Hyperboreans to end up, and why the mythos and the elder god, like why the mythos, sorry, the outer gods and the elder gods are so interested, is because human beings have this really powerful creative energy about them. And so I might make it like, hey, they're like, yeah, they worship Zeus. So what? I might make it a little bit more, well, they want to co opt that because there actually is some power there because humans believe in these things. So I might make a little bit of a difference to the magic and that kind of stuff, but also make it a little bit. I'm going to focus more on the historical stuff
Yeah.
because I love that.
Well, and
But
two,
none of that's
your
a
my guess is that your players will also be far more knowledgeable about actual Roman history and ideas than your average bear. And so you might as well leverage that. I mean, prior knowledge among players about the world is huge because if they have actual prior knowledge about the world, you can drop things, you can foreshadow, and they will actually pick the stuff up.
Well,
So
and it'll be
cool.
fun because I can do that. And at the same time, this is different enough that I can also go, oh, you think you know things, but this is different, which is nice when you're not completely pigeonholed into the, well, that's not what happened in year 198 and at this month.
Right.
I can change it because, well, Cthulhu wasn't being summoned in the real world at that time either. So but it's a lot of fun. It looks exactly like the type of game that I wanted when I bought it. So I'm
Cool.
very interested to play.
Excellent. Well, I'll tell you what, listeners, I've got two links actually, to the one that goes directly to Modiphius's U.S. store for Cohors, and then one to the game's homepage. It's kind of funky. Yeah, they have I'm looking at the page right here. They have a page that has some videos and has links to free downloads and all the different products. And then actually, there are multiple videos here. And then from that page, you can go directly to the U.S., well, either the U.K. or the U.S. store, and look at the content itself, the materials and the books and stuff like that.
Great.
So cool. Maybe we'll
Yeah.
get to play this one day. That would be cool.
That would be awesome.
Thank you, as always, for listening to Fluff and Crunch. You can subscribe to the podcast. You can subscribe to the YouTube channel, all through the links in the show notes.